bit. Okay. Hi, my name is Sascha Pohflepp, and I think, oops. Is it running automatically? No, for this crowd, like this should be enough, I thought. I'm an artist and I also design. Oops. And I'm sort of based in London. And I titled this talk, "We Might Be Living in the Wrong Experiment." That's actually a quote by Jeff Manow, who writes the amazing building blog at Exit Art in New York recently. So one could say that basically all technology is probably an experiment and thus the subject of promises and realities that follow after. But especially if you look at the 1970s and 1960s, we were actually promised different things. So this illustration, a NASA illustration from the 70s, a space colony by Rick Guides, one of the two illustrators who worked for NASA. So it's basically the Bay Area in space, as you can see. But a few years later, the promise radically changed. So suddenly there was SDI and I don't know if you can read it. It says multiple kill vehicles, artist rendering. So something had happened basically, but what had happened? And basically this had happened. So somebody with a much different agenda was in place and tweaked the goals, if you want. It's the second time cover today. So this is especially interesting because it really shows that our technological future, even though it quite didn't happen like this with SDI, is always a matter of choice. And it's interesting to look at how we usually talk about the future. So in this kind of scenario making technique that was popularized during the Cold War is usually that you look where you stand currently and you try to extrapolate a future from that point and kind of talk about that. But knowing, as we just saw, that things could have been very different if Reagan would have, we're going to see later, but there's always these neuralgic points in time where decisions are being made, and it might actually make sense to turn around and try to find these points and ask whether there were any real alternatives and why those alternatives weren't selected at the time, and even how could such alternatives be reclaimed now. And there's actually a quote by Langdon Winner from his book The Whale and Reactor, which it's 1980s book about technology and highly recommended. So, and if you talk about energy technology, there was actually such a point in time, which was the 1980 US election, which put Reagan into power in 1981. And obviously Carter had a very different idea of these things. And then Reagan went and changed many things. So what this is proposing is basically to look at what some people call counterfactual history, what other people call alternate reality, starting at 1980, and what could have been considering Carter's focus on renewable energy and maybe exaggerating it as well to kind of make a point. And all this is basically to open up what I try to call a possibility space to talk about actually our own challenges as well. So in this world, Carter goes and takes something called National Renewable Energy Lab, which actually exists in Golden, Colorado, and they happen to they basically lost 95% of their funding when Reagan came into place, and he takes it instead and elevates it into this kind of earthbound NASA with the same audacity and funding that was behind the Apollo missions. This kind of just send us the receipts attitude, basically, just you need to do this, then just do it, and it becomes the Golden Institute. So how's this being told? By creating a narrative and basically materializing things that you're just going to see in a second, such as a character named Douglas Arndt, who you see there, a painting and a few models which sat in the lobby of this fictitious institution. And while the scenario is basically somewhat exaggerated, the engineering parts of it are quite sound and have been conceived and designed with engineering people from the Imperial College in London. So Douglas Arndt, he's kind of the face of the institute, and he's the prolific senior strategist who frequently appears on TV, and he kind of talks about the institute's projects that have a significant impact in American life, later in the 80s. And this character is actually based on this guy who you can find at archive.org. It's an amazing US Army video about how one rocket that he kind of helped with ended the Cold War, which is completely ridiculous, but it's an amazing video. So the Institute's projects, and there's really important work on different levels and scales, and that's kind of an important point for the project because it tries to talk about how change could happen in a highly industrialized society. So there's First, there's the scale of the planetary. Pursuing geoengineering and taking charge of the planet as a system, trying to create artificial thunderstorms to harvest lightning. And that's being told through a painting, it's quite dark, which is, can actually run it again if you want, which is montage from different sources, and it shows Golden in the foreground in Colorado, well powered, and in the distance you see an artificial thunderstorm and like tall conductors that catch lightning and make the electricity available to consumers. And these like little silver iodide filled balloons in the corner to seed the thunderstorms in the first place. Then there's the level of nation infrastructure. It's kind of like the intermediate one. And that's using the American freeway system, which is basically metal objects with people in them, fast metal objects as a source of power. And this is done through installing induction loops at freeway off-ramps operated by a cafe chain called Chuck's Cafe. And you see a model of it here. That's one of the lobby art things I was talking about. So the driver of the car doesn't actually brake when exiting the freeway, but instead they are being slowed down by the so-called Lorentz force when like a magnetic thing passes through induction coils. And you can maybe see that like the loop says Chuck says thanks, and that's because Chuck gets to keep some of the electricity, or like most of the electricity, and the driver gets a cup of coffee, or a discount on a cup of coffee. And then finally there's the scale of the individual, which is people want to participate economically, and actually kind of like the Institute encourages it as well, because for them it kind of goes back to Benjamin Franklin and the kite. So what people do is that they hack their cars, and what you see here is a Chevy El Camino that's been modified to be a lightning harvester, and you see like the huge lightning rod on the pickup part of it. And in the back, there's an array of supercapacitors to temporarily store the electricity while you're on the way to one of the drive-through energy exchanges, which is a really, really dangerous ride. And so to conclude, these things are meant to be social objects that open up the possibility space and like a discourse around them. And interestingly, what I found last year, Jimmy kind of agrees as well.
So you see, the point I'm making here, that the technological advances are there, provided our nation's great scientific and engineering capability are marshaled and focused on those key opportunities.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. Which one was